Border podcast, an inside look at California politics in the state legislature. I'm your host, Assemblyman Josh Hoover from District 7, and we're joined again today by Assemblyman Heath Flora from District 9, Amador, Calaveras, Sacramento, San Joaquin, and Stanislaus counties. Welcome back, Heath.
It's great to be here. Good to see you.
I appreciate you coming back on, and I know we had a really fun conversation last time. A ton to go over today, but I wanted to ask you first how your district's doing after that big storm yesterday. Obviously, we both have a sliver of Sacramento County, but we're also, Northern California and Central Valley kind of adjacent. So how's your district doing after all that craziness?
Yeah, the district looks good. As we talked about a little bit, we all have small streams, smaller rivers. They're obviously much larger now with all that water. But overall, I think we survived it. It's not like last year where we had just a lot of saturation and then a big storm. So this year, I think we're faring it significantly better. But I will say, if we get another big storm coming through, we could have problems again. But so far, so good.
For sure. Yeah, we've got, I would say the same in our district. I mean, we've got some trees, some power shutdowns, power outages. We've got a lot of transit disruption in Sac County.
Yeah.
Like I was driving by some light rail stops in my neighborhood, and the poles are just broken in half and hanging. I mean, it hit them pretty hard.
Yeah, I think we probably saw more of that, honestly, in my district, is just down power lines and, utility poles coming down, and which I think we'll probably talk about a little bit later, but maybe we should, a little undergrounding might not be a horrible idea. Yeah,
undergrounding would be great. It would be great. It's so crazy. I was at, my daughter's birthday was over the weekend, and we had her party on Sunday in Rancho Cordova. And it was in that KP Market place center off in Rancho. And halfway through the party, they're doing karaoke and stuff, and the entire center lost power.
Nice.
And so we ended up, we ended the party early. Yeah, and we went back to our house. But it was definitely a memorable birthday because we had all these like 12-year-old girls with iPhone flashlights in a dark room trying to open presents and
stuff. I love it. And you think about that too. Like, I'm not sure our generation really understands. Like, I mean, our parents used to have candles in every door, every room, right? And lighters and matches and all this stuff. And like, we lost power last time. Like, crap, I don't have a single candle.
Dude, that is such a good point. I never even thought about that. Yeah, we used to light the candles and stuff. Totally. You didn't just have a phone to pull out and shine your way. So
I'm going to be going to Hobby Lobby and buying a bunch of candles today.
Yeah, so. It might not be a bad idea. My house was spared the power outage, but some of my neighbors had it, and it was a fun day. But I know that, in my district, we've got a lot of SMUD territory. They're working hard to get things back up, and we'll, hopefully not have that same level of wind the rest of this week. So, well,
these are the days you really learn to appreciate your utility workers. Because we're all just whining and complaining because we're out of power, and those are the men and women that are out there.
That's when they go to work.
Exactly. Yeah. So these are days we appreciate them
very much. So definitely big shout out. Want to talk to you. We'll jump right into the weekly recap because we've got just so much has happened in the last week, and I wanted to get your thoughts on a few things. The first is that we obviously had our kind of 2-year House of Origin deadline last year. Basically, any bill that was introduced last year had to be passed out of in the Assembly or the Senate had to be passed out of those houses by last week. I just wanted to highlight a couple bills that died that I think I was pretty happy about. On this podcast, we talked about the youth football ban that you and I were actually at that press conference a few weeks ago. That bill obviously won't be moving forward. The bill prohibiting school resource officers or limiting or restricting school resource officers, AB 1299, also was on the cut list this year, which I'm really thankful for.
Mr. Jackson.
Yeah, the Jackson bill. And he was ready. I was ready to talk on that bill last week. We actually talked about it on the podcast last week, and then he didn't bring it up. So, must not have had the votes, is my guess.
Well, I think that's probably right. And I don't know if you want to go down that rabbit hole. I subbed in for Assemblymember Dolly in education that day when we heard that bill in education. And Assemblymember Marisucci, the chair of education, really, and his staff really gutted that bill. It was a very different bill than what he intended it to be. Which honestly is props to education committee staff.
Good for them.
And then my personal beliefs, it didn't do what he wanted it to do, so he didn't bring it forward. And none of, even in the committee, our Democratic colleagues were not particularly happy that this was even the conversation. So,
I mean, just this idea, especially in a day and age where we have the type of school safety concerns that we have today, it's like the fact that you would want to restrict or limit or even get rid of school resource officers that are keeping students safe in our high schools, like it just seems completely backwards.
Yeah,
So,
and I think you and I probably err on the side of we'd love to see more cops in all of these places.
yeah, absolutely.
So,
If anything, a lot of schools need more officers and really more support to keep things safe, right?
100%.
So it's just like, it's frustrating, and it's also a local control issue. Like, if a school district wants to contract with their local PD and protect their kids, let them do it. Like,
well, as you well know, Sacramento typically knows best, right? I mean, in our own minds, it's so crazy. Like, we all love to talk about local control until it relates to Sacramento. And then we get under that white dome and we tend to forget that there's actually a lot of really, really good local electeds that have a job to do.
Absolutely.
And I think you know that better than I do, quite frankly. So,
I mean, it's true. And I hear that from my city council members all the time and my school board members all the time. And, let them govern. I mean,
let them do their job. Novel idea.
Exactly. So, last one I was going to mention was the bill. Was it ACA 4? Or I think it was the one that would allow felons to vote.
Mm-hmm.
That bill is going to be dead for the year as well, which was another one I was concerned about.
Yeah.
So, I think we've got. I think that was interesting. A lot of bills that I had concerns about did not move forward. So I'm thankful for that. And now we're getting ready for a bunch of new bills that are coming down. So.
Well, I think the last year, end of session, as you well know, nothing really died on the floor, right? I mean, everything got through. And I think that was largely because of the turmoil that our Democratic colleagues were under the speakership change in our House. But I am actually very excited, or not, maybe excited is too good. I'm encouraged because Speaker Rivas has seemed to, like, if you don't have the votes, we're not bringing it to the floor. Mm-hmm. And as you remember, a number of years ago, we'd have bills on call for 4 or 5 hours, just people browbeating to get votes. And I do not feel that speaker is going to be that way. And I really do appreciate him. Like, it's a pleasant change. Yeah.
It's such an ugly way to make policy too. I mean, just to the point where you see people just being surrounded and, coerced into voting for things. It's like, it's really hard to watch, like, up close and personal.
Well, and it's crazy. Like, and we've seen it. Like, you got one party cussing and the one dude's in tears. Yeah. Like, I mean, like, people don't quite understand how
it gets really intense.
It really does. And
the public doesn't see that because it's not on TV per se, the way the main session. I mean, you can see, like, the vote board and the speaker or whoever's running the session, but you can't really see that stuff going on unless you're there.
No, absolutely. And there's a lot of, I mean, I've been doing this for, almost 8 years now. And I can think back on many, many bills where literally men and women both are in tears. Men and women both are getting yelled at by their own party to vote for a particular bill. So it is. I am very thankful, and actually, quite frankly, think that's leadership. Where let's know if you got the votes, bring it to the floor, and if you don't, then you didn't do your job.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. No, totally. So, lots more to come in the next few weeks. We're going to be talking about some of the bills coming this year, but there's still a lot to be introduced still. So we'll wait on that for now. I can't remember a podcast where we didn't talk about something going on with a store closure or crime in the Bay Area or something like that. But there were so many stories in this last week. So I'm just going to blow through these and then we can talk about the general topic. But I put together a little crime roundup today. Kaiser sent a memo to their Oakland employees telling them to avoid going out to lunch in downtown and bring their own food to work. Clorox in Oakland hired security to walk their employees around the campus and make sure they got to their cars safely and stuff. Denny's in Oakland closed due to crime. This was last week. Jeffery's toy store in San Francisco, which, famously inspired the Toy Story franchise, the Pixar franchise, shut down. I can't even remember how many years they've been at, like 40 plus years or something.
It's been a minute. Yeah.
It's been a long time. Shut down due to crime. And then Santa Monica ranked, this is obviously in LA, but Santa Monica ranked as one of the least safe cities in California. Which, if you know anything about Santa Monica, that's pretty crazy, right? I used to live, like, next to Santa Monica, and that was not the perception.
Right.
So I mean, that was in 1 week. I mean, this is, I don't know. I mean, I feel like I sound like a broken record, but it's just getting absolutely out of hand.
Well, I think the week before, In and Out.
Yeah, exactly. In and
Right.
Out the week before, which we talked about. It's crazy.
I think it's sad. I really do. I think there is a state of our state currently that we're not addressing. And, sadly, I as you know me, I'm not a particularly partisan guy.
Yeah.
I try very hard to work across the aisle and build relationships. But this issue, my Democratic colleagues have to own.
Yeah.
It's just that simple. When there are no consequences for anything anymore, when we talked about Prop 47, AB 109, those types of issues, and their absolutely unwillingness to address it in any meaningful way, it's asinine. My daughter and I, a number of months ago, were at Target, and a dude literally runs past us with a shopping cart full of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And it just makes you think, this is sad. This is where we're at. And I'm not saying that we go back to the 70s, 80s of just throw everybody in jail mentality.
Yeah, throw away the key sort of thing.
That's dumb. That doesn't work. But I do not believe that we should continue these policies that we have going on right now and expect different change.
Totally. I mean, you have to have consequences. They have to be reasonable. They have to fit the crime.
100%.
And you have to have a focus on rehabilitation because we want the people that can be rehabilitated to have that opportunity. But you can't just not give people consequences. It just doesn't work. And that's what we're seeing right now.
So. No, I mean, $940. And there's no, literally every day I can go steal $940.
Yep.
And there's going to be absolutely no consequences. And in some ways, who's the idiot? I'm the idiot that's sitting in a Target line waiting to pay $400 for stuff, right?
Yep.
And meanwhile, I could walk out the front door. At some point, be a little bit tongue in cheek there, but
it's true.
The idea, this is craziness. This is legitimately crazy. And then we just think people are going to change. No.
Well, yeah, human nature often doesn't change, but but and that's why we have these, societal rules and stuff. And so I think the concern I have is we're creating kind of this culture where it's okay. And, you start opening up opportunities for more and more of it if it continues to go unchecked. So
when you think about too, you're a father, I'm a father, you can tell your kid not to do something.
Yep.
And then if there's no consequences to that, they're going to do it again tomorrow. Right.
Yeah.
Until it's not a he said, she said thing. It's just it's simple, human behavior.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to me that we have not been able to fix this yet.
Yeah.
Because I really do think there's a lot of smart people on both sides of this issue that could have a very open, honest conversation if they had the political will.
Well, we're going to talk more about that in a little bit because I do want to get into what we think might happen this year, specifically when it comes to retail theft, but I couldn't agree more. So another big kind of dust up last week was the majority party held a press conference introducing AB 205, which is this bill. So in 2022, the legislature passed a budget trailer bill that implemented a new utility charge on customers, mostly large utility customers. The majority party who passed that bill came out last week with a bill to repeal that provision and decried, energy costs and all these things, which they're not wrong on that. But the crazy part is it's in large part their policies. And so they passed this bill a year and a half ago, and now they're trying to repeal it or at least run it back, walk it back. And so I don't know. You probably saw that press conference, but it was pretty eye-opening.
No, it's fascinating. And I think you and I talked offline a little bit about this, right? Where this is exactly the reason why we don't do policy in budget trailer bills.
Yeah.
It's stupid. And go ahead.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're talking about a bill that had 3 days of public eyeballs. Yeah. You can't respond to that. There's no input that can happen there.
No, absolutely not. And on an issue like this, that's massive, right? And I get very frustrated. I know the IOUs are all, they can be an easy target for public scrutiny. And there are some that are better than others, and some, maybe have had a history of not particularly doing things the right way. though I do truly believe that all of them are moving in the right direction. But I get more frustrated at us as a body that we mandate and demand they do X, Y, and Z to make us feel better. And then we just expect there to be no additional costs. Like, I think at some point we have to look in the mirror and be like, well, if we want to keep rates down, if we want to help our consumers out, then maybe we have an honest conversation about what we're doing, what we're mandating them. Because at the end of the day, like, I mean, whether you like it or not, they do have shareholders, right? They are a for-profit business. And so I think there's a bigger conversation about all of that. I think number one, if there was ever a piece of legislation that really rips the Band-Aid off of not doing policy in budget trailer bills, this was it.
Yeah.
Because it had massive implications. Yeah. Right. And our leader, James Gallagher, he screams and yells about this almost on a yearly basis about talking about, like, why are we doing policy and budget? Like, this is crazy. I think this is a really, really good example of why that's not a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, this whole issue didn't touch Utilities Committee. It didn't get a discussion in a policy committee where, groups can support or oppose, or members of the public can come and speak. It was really interesting. Ashley Zavala, who did the big story for KCRA on the press conference last week, asked the author of the bill at the end of the press conference, so, you voted on this. Now you're saying that it's bad, but you actually voted to put it through a year and a half ago. And the response was, well, I don't think we should have done it in a budget trailer bill. Okay. Some folks have said, like, well, we kind of missed this one, right? But if you open up the analysis for the bill, the Flora analysis that we had access to, the number 2 point was this policy that they're trying to repeal. Yeah. And so it's just like, they're trying to say we didn't really know about this, or we didn't have time, but they knew it was there, and it's frustrating.
Totally. And I think that's where, like, some of us, like, when it comes to budget trailer bills or budget in general, like, there's good things in pretty much every budget in chief and budget trailer bill, right? Yeah. There's always things that we support, and there's always things that we don't support, which is sort of, quite frankly, part of their game, right? And there's also rules that you can't have, a bill that touches on multiple subjects. Yeah. With the exception of budget. Yep. Right. And so I think if we're going to be honest with people, that really needs to be cleaned up, or we're going to continue to have these issues.
It is part of the game for sure. And it's kind of interesting because this is how a lot of federal policy is made. Like, they put just these massive bills with all these different things. And then you're like, well, you're bad and good, or you can make any argument you want on the vote. Right. Totally. And I just think that as a legislature, like, we have a single subject rule for that reason. Like, we don't want to be the federal government. Like, we want to do policy on a case by case basis, but you don't do that if it's in a budget bill. So
I just think just to be completely honest, and I voted for that. Yeah. Like, on the budget trailer bill. I did.
Well, there was some good stuff in the bill, and I think that's the point. Yeah. It's like,
and that's where I get frustrated about it, because and listen, I'm also we all make votes. I mean, we make 2,500 votes a year, right? Yeah, and this is exactly the reason why budget bills are so challenging. And quite frankly, I don't believe they get the attention that they deserve.
Yeah, for sure.
I think, Assemblymember Fong, Ober and Ulte before him, who are vice chairs of budget, have one of the hardest jobs as far as vice chairmanships in our caucus. Yeah. Because there are so many things going on in these bills that they're tracking. And I think for us, like, we have to make those decisions as individual members. But it is frustrating because a lot of these bills have really good pieces, and there's usually something in there you're like,
I know.
So it's that risk versus reward.
No, it's really tough. So this next one's kind of fun. So not really fun. It's just a fun conversation. But we thought the tackle football ban was kind of like, okay, that's stepping over the line. Now there's a bill that's been introduced in the Senate to require all new cars to be produced where they cannot go more than 10 miles an hour over the speed limit. This has been obviously an interesting talk of conversation in the media and stuff, but what are your initial thoughts on that one?
I'm completely hosed. I've sent the senator that authored that bill a couple different theme song suggestions for that particular bill. And I'm having a lot of fun with it, and we have a good relationship. And so it's been kind of fun, but it's just crazy. It really is. Like, I mean, in some ways I understand like the thought process, right? Like in a perfect world, if we're all just, robots, okay, fine, but we're not. Like in like just the simple like merging onto a freeway, passing a car, just normal
Day-to-day
life
stuff,
things.
I know.
Like it's like, are we kidding me? And first of all, like I don't know if I've driven the speed limit for a minute, and I have a driving record to prove it. Like I'm a huge supporter of CHP, and I paved a lot of freeways with my tickets.
Yeah,
so
there you go.
No, it's just crazy to me, and I think it's just sort of a perspective that I don't understand.
I think that's it, right? It's like he's making the public safety argument, and obviously, there's a lot of things we could do for public safety that would completely violate everyone's civil rights, right? Like, I mean, we could restrict movement. I mean, we had these conversations during COVID, right? Yeah. What the governor was trying to do during COVID with restricting businesses being open and restrict for safety. Well, sure, you could do a lot of things to make sure no one ever gets hurt. That doesn't mean you should do it. Yeah. And I think that's where this bill it's way over the line in terms of government overreach. Yeah.
And I actually look forward to, listen, the senator and I have a very good friendship, though we don't agree much politically, right?
Yeah.
It's just the way that it is. And I like that. I would be curious to have a conversation with him about like where this idea came from. Yeah. Like, and trying to back that up a little bit of like, okay, because I agree with you completely. Like, yeah, there's a lot of things we could do to protect everybody. Wrap them in a bubble. Yeah. Exactly. All of those things. And that's, you could probably be safer. But at the end of the day, individual freedoms and liberties. And this is the other thing too on that particular issue. I love our colleagues when we talk about everybody has the right to choose, right? Mm-hmm. But then at times it feels like we only have the right to choose if we agree with them. Yep. And like, well, if I don't get the privilege of putting my thought process and my ideology onto you, then why do you get to put yours onto me? Yeah. I think there's a conversation to be had there.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. And it'll be interesting to see if this gets any traction. Pardon the pun. That was unintentional.
Well, if you're only going 10 miles an hour, you probably get traction. So,
but it's I wonder, is our legislature in a place, we're pretty imbalanced as a whole, where they would actually consider this conversation like a legitimate conversation? To me, it shouldn't be, but I wonder what's going to happen with it this year.
I don't think so. This is just me being optimistic. If you look at the last polls on as far as voter registration, every single congressional, Senate, Assembly district in the state of California had an increase in Republican registration. Yeah,
that's true.
And there's a few council or city council seats, supervisor seats that did not, but overwhelmingly, the state had an increase in Republican voter registration. Yeah. I don't know why that is exactly. But if I was in the opposition or if I was on the Democratic side, right, I'd be taking note of that. And you've had a conversation with our colleagues.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's sort of like the Republican, the fringe sides of both of our parties can do a lot of damage. Mm-hmm. And I think that our Democratic colleagues are dealing with that right now. I really do.
Yeah, this one, I hope you're right. I think you're right that this probably won't get very far, but I just always wonder on these bills, because some bills get introduced every year that I'm like, that's not going to happen. Clearly that's crazy. And then it moves through, right? So we'll see.
And the author of these bills, I'm not sure there's anybody in elected office today that works harder than he does.
Yeah, at getting his bills passed,
correct.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
He
does work his bills very hard.
He's a very, very, very good author, whether you agree with it or not.
Last thing I'll make on this bill is I think the timing is weird because we're talking about implementing, even in his city, they're already testing and implementing autonomous vehicles that are that is going to solve this issue over time. Obviously, we're not there yet. But it's like in the next 20 years, I think there's going to be some real. You rode in the
Waymo.
one of those the Waymo cars. They're incredible.
Dude.
So like, I'm like, do we need this bill right now? I mean, it seems like technology is going to solve this problem, in the next couple decades.
Listen, I'm a huge fan of Waymo, to be honest with you, and like-minded technologies. It is something. It is crazy because I've ridden them in San Francisco.
Yeah.
And then I did it on my own in Scottsdale.
Oh, okay. Nice.
And just got on that
just
app.
Like hopped in one. Oh,
and
nice.
then got picked up from a dinner and went to another location.
Yeah.
And it is the craziest thing.
It is.
But like there wasn't a single moment that I felt unsafe.
Yeah.
And so I think to your point, like it's going to sort itself out.
I hate to say it because everyone has a different perception when they ride in an autonomous. I mean, a lot of people haven't yet, but when you do, everyone kind of has, they either get freaked out because it's so weird. It is weird, right?
Totally
it's just like, this is trippy. I showed my wife the video. She's like, yeah, that's really trippy. Or you feel like this is really cool. This feels, but when I rode in the same day I rode in an Uber with a guy that was the worst driver in the history of California. And I did not feel safe. Okay. Yeah. So when we talk, I felt a lot more safe being driven around by a robot than this Uber driver that was just like running yellows and flying through San Francisco like crazy.
Well, I think San Francisco was your problem there, right? I mean, that would never happen in Folsom.
That's a good point. Yeah, our Uber drivers out here are a little different, but I mean, I'm just saying, man, there are a lot of times I don't feel safe when I'm a passenger in a vehicle.
Well, and truthfully, like I mean, when you actually, and I know we don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but the amount of data points that Waymo and those groups are collecting on every second, I mean, that's more than, because though I do not support distracted driving, you and I are probably always writing a text, reading an email, trying to drive. Trying
not to read, but at the very least, voice text.
Listen, I'm very open, very honest about my abilities to drive, but but I think those are. So for me, like I trust those folks that are putting that together more than I trust myself. Yeah. And so if I can get in the back seat of a robot driving a car, I'm cool. Like, let's go.
I'm cool. That's great. Well, last story in the recap. So I wanted to touch. So Dan Walters wrote this piece about California's catalog of dysfunctional programs. And I just love some of the points that he made on it. So I wanted to just very briefly go through it. So he talks about the explosion of cost of the bullet train, right? Which I know you're probably a little bit familiar with.
Yep.
High-speed rails cost is, was thrown to the voters, $33 billion. Now it's well over $100 billion. And
nowhere near it.
No, yeah. I mean, whether it happens or not, I think is a big question, right? Talked about EDD during COVID-19, losing $20-30 billion in fraud. Talks about homelessness has gone up 40% since 2018 when Newsom took office. We've got the Air Resources Board continuing to give money to electric technology makers that are not, their products aren't working. Anyway, it just goes down the line. But obviously prison costs have exploded. And then, but I just thought it was really interesting, and we don't have to stay on this for very long, but I'm just like, where's the examples of when California has been able to like successfully implement a technology project or successfully handle a crisis? Yeah. I mean, it just feels like in every metric we're failing, and it's frustrating.
Man, I think you're right in a lot of ways. I will say that there's one program that I'm super proud of to being a very small part in, and as far as like meeting goals, because I do think, obviously, my background, I come from an ag family. My family's been in ag, like Central Valley, born and raised in Modesto, farm up and down the state. My first big piece of legislation in that program, there was a farmer program, an engine replacement program.
Nice.
And then this last year, we did this big thing with Cali EPA, the Air Board, our local air districts, because we met the goals and exceeded the goals a few years before.
That's awesome.
And this is where want to encourage California. And this was an ag bill, right? I mean, it was really related to tractors. First year wasn't great. The paperwork was clunky. The dealerships that sold the tractors, it was just awkward. The salesmen and women didn't necessarily want to fill out the paperwork. The farmers, like, why are we doing all this? But the next year, like the air board, our local air district worked with the dealerships, worked with the growers. Like, how can we expedite this? How can we make this more user friendly? And listen to them.
Yeah.
And it became one of the most successful programs CARB has ever implemented.
That's awesome.
It's a really, really good story of how actually like local enterprises and government can work together.
Mm-hmm.
And I've said this multiple times. I'm a true believer, like the carrot versus the stick approach.
When it comes to like environmental regulations and stuff. Yeah,
exactly. And that's where like set your goals. I don't know if you've heard this, but nobody's really arguing the governor's goals right now.
Yeah.
What you're hearing is industries like, help us help you. Like, we have the ability, the technology to get there. Yeah. Maybe not in the time frame that you originally set forth, right? And we talk about like heavy equipment, vehicles like trucks right now. That program that CARB is like, it's coming down. The mandate's coming. The technology doesn't exist. Yeah, it is not because OEMs aren't trying to figure it out.
Right,
it just doesn't exist right now. So work with them, help them, and so when you have so many elected officials, there's 120 of us, 121 including the governor. When so few of us have actually worked in private sector, we have these grandiose ideas of what we think society should look like. Yep. And I'm not saying that those ideas aren't necessarily right or wrong. I'm just saying at times the technology doesn't exist to meet those goals. Yeah. So work with said industry and help them reach your goals. So,
well, and I think as legislators, we need to acknowledge that we're not always the expert, right? Like, I mean, we don't like the idea that a bunch of legislators know how quickly an industry can transition to some new technology. I mean, it's the last thing that we would know, right? And so again, incentivize, don't mandate. Yeah. And I think we've gone so far down the mandating path in California that we're actually harming, I think, our ability to meet the goals that we want to meet. Yeah.
And I don't know if you met with, just say Penske. They were in the building last week.
I didn't meet with them, but
Penske is one of the groups that's actively trying to meet these goals. Like they're not fighting it at all. And if they literally bought every EV truck on the market today, they would still fall short. Yeah. And so here we have a company that's actively ready and willing to meet the goals. Technology doesn't exist. So what are we doing to partner with them? It's okay. Like, how do we help you? Like, you're clearly on board with this thought process. You're clearly okay with it to a certain degree. So I really do wish regulators, the board, electeds would listen to these folks who really understand it. And like, okay, we're not arguing your goals. We're just simply asking you, like, we could do it all tomorrow. We're still going to fall short. So give us some time to meet your goals.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. There was an electric school bus mandate that we debated last year in Education Committee. Yeah. And when I was on the school board prior to this, I supported, using some of the grants that were available when we had diesel buses that went out of commission, replacing some of them with electric buses. I thought that was fine, right? In the areas we could make it work, and if they were cost effective, let's go ahead and do that. But the idea that we mandate them on every district in California by a certain date, he wanted to do it by 2030 or 2035, something like that, including rural districts where they don't make sense, including, districts that might not have the money to do it, and not even in taking into consideration that a lot of districts are already going that direction and they can't buy the buses because there are not enough of them on the market to buy. And it's like, why on earth would we mandate something that isn't even like available yet in the real world? And so, it's like, oh, you're anti-electric buses. I'm not, but I'm anti-mandating them on districts that might not be able to get them. It's crazy.
I think that's the whole thought, right? Like, no, like we support the technology, but mandated by a time and a place that Sacramento says is not always reality. And then, like, even on the trucking side, okay, so you buy a new tractor trailer, okay, let's just say a new tractor, new truck, you're going to be $150,000, $250,000, right, to buy a new Pete or whatever it may be.
Yep.
And one of those electric trucks are north of 600.
Yeah, it's insane.
And so where does those costs go? They get passed down to the consumer.
Sure.
And so all that does is jack up the prices for all of our constituents.
All the food. Yep.
None of this is done in a silo. And every now and then, well, actually, I would say the majority of the time, we view it as a silo. And in reality, it's simply not.
Yeah. So. They're not consequences that you see immediately, but they are consequences that our constituents see over time. And it's a huge problem. Mm-hmm. So we'll move on to looking ahead a little bit about what's coming down this year. I'm not going to talk about a lot of bills today. I did want to mention the fentanyl issue. It's an issue I think you and I both really care about. Mm-hmm. We both are parents. We both want this stuff out of our schools. I introduced a bill last week that does three things. It creates new penalties for the sale of fentanyl to kids specifically. And then it adds fentanyl to sentence enhancements that already exist in the code for in the same category as cocaine and heroin and things like that. So it actually puts fentanyl in there. In some cases, especially when it comes to kids, I think fentanyl is even more deadly than some of those other drugs because kids don't even know that they're taking it a lot of the time in high school and stuff. So most of these penalties involve either kids or fentanyl dealing around schools. Just something I'm super passionate about. Do you think that we're going to make progress this year as a legislature on fentanyl?
I do. I think your idea, my idea of progress may be different than potentially the majority party.
Sure. Yeah.
But I do know that we have a new chair of public safety.
Yeah.
Who may or may not be running for mayor of Sacramento. What I do know about Sacramento is people are really tired of their kids dying because of a fentanyl poisoning. And I do. I think on a lot of these issues, whether it's retail theft, whether it's fentanyl, people are tired of it. And politicians really answer to voters. And they answer to the ballot box, right? And voters can really send a strong message like, listen, if you're screwing off and not protecting my kids, if mom doesn't feel safe about going to Target, if dad is worried about, the daughter taking, a pill because she's stressed out about a test and it's laced with fentanyl and she passes away, as a father, that's our worst nightmare.
It is,
right?
Yeah.
And so if we don't take that serious because we don't want to put somebody in jail, people aren't buying that anymore.
Yeah.
And it's not a partisan issue anymore.
Yep.
It really is communities want to be safe. And we've talked about it earlier. Nobody's saying we go back to the 1980s of lock everybody up and throw away the key. No, That's not what we're saying at all. I certainly don't want that. But I also do not want what we're doing now where there's absolutely and honestly, I say absolutely, there's very, very little consequences for any of these actions right now. And
if you're dealing fentanyl to literally the most vulnerable of our population, our kids, I just can't think of a worse thing, that you could do. It needs to be treated with, the utmost seriousness. Yeah. It's just incredible.
And it's a whole different conversation, but it's the same concept as next few years, we're going to see, and coming down the pike is a lot of, internet sex trafficking, internet child pornography, AI, all of these issues are something that we're going to have to deal with. And I really just want to bring that to people's attention as well. I know we all love our technology. We do. But we really need to be honest about who has the responsibility to protect.
Yeah.
What tools does law enforcement not have to deal with this? And I think we as a legislator need to really focus on this because, father of two daughters, you've got kiddos, whether it's retail theft, internet crimes, child exploitation, human trafficking, fentanyl. There's a lot going on in the world right now.
Yeah.
And I think, sometimes in Sacramento, we focus on, putting a mandate that a car can't go over 10 miles an hour. And in reality,
Yeah.
we've got people creating AI images of our kids, to do
Yep.
things with. And so I think at some point I would love for us as an elected body to get back to the things that people actually care about.
Yeah.
And this was sort of the frustration with the youth football thing.
Yeah.
Why in God's green earth did we go down that rabbit hole?
Yeah. How about we not address that and actually address fentanyl that
Yeah.
is bringing true harm to
Yeah.
families, right?
Yeah.
And kids.
Or
So,
human trafficking, or pick a subject.
yeah.
Youth football is not one.
Yeah.
So
No, totally agree. Been getting a lot of questions moving on from fentanyl and I hope you're right. I hope we do make progress on that this year. Got some emails to the podcast about initiatives coming up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I just wanted to touch on a three that I think have a direct correlation to the legislature. The big one is on people's ballots. I think ballots are getting mailed out today, actually.
Yeah.
But throughout California, in the voter guide right now, is Proposition 1. That's the only one that's going to be on this upcoming primary election ballot. And it's the mental health bond.
Mm-hmm.
This was put on by the legislature, actually. And it's a $6 billion potential bond to increase mental health services in California, retweak some of the way we approach homelessness and mental health, provide more housing. But, I have some concerns with it from the standpoint of it continues down the path of housing first, right?
Mm-hmm.
Housing first, services voluntary, services later. And we've spent $20 billion plus over the last 6 years to solve homelessness. And I mentioned it earlier, it's gone up by 40%. Today, we have 49% of the nation's unsheltered homeless population in California. Half of the nation's unsheltered homeless live in California. And I think we can honestly say, as a legislature, we should acknowledge, if we're being honest, that what we're doing is not working. So I think the question is, does this move us in the right direction or the wrong direction? And is it the best use of taxpayer dollars? So it'll be interesting to see.
Totally. I've been on record and continue to support Prop 1.
Yeah.
Not that I don't have concerns, to your point. I think since the 70s, we've screwed up mental health in the state.
Oh, for sure.
And is Prop 1 going to fix it? I don't think it's going to fix it overnight. And I share your concerns. Really, the biggest issue that I have with Prop 1 is the housing first thing.
Yeah.
Because there's just a part of me, and you talk to our firefighters, not as much now as it was in 2008, and when we really had that housing crisis, right? Where, these folks, these unhoused individuals would go into a house, cut every, other stud out, cut the rafters out to burn
Mm-hmm.
wood. And then, we almost had a friend die when he went through a roof of one of these things, right?
Mm.
And so I say all of that, if we don't deal with mental health, you could put somebody in the nicest house possible,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
But if they're not mentally sound,
Yeah.
it's going to be destroyed in a week or less. We've seen it. And so I think personally that where the housing first concept comes in, and maybe this is where they're headed, and I would hope that they are, is if you are a single parent or, a family that is fallen on hard times, how do we as a state work with those folks to keep them in their house?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I'm not just here for social, just handing out money just willy-nilly, but I think there is an idea there. If you can keep a family in a home, it's going to be far cheaper for the state than if they get on the street and we deal with it later, right? I do believe that there might be 10% of the homeless population, unhoused populations out there now that we can actually help. I think the overwhelming majority of sadly, need services that they're not willing to take.
Yeah.
Where I would like to see the state focus is, how do we stop that? How do we keep people in a house, right? How do we make sure that they have a living, working wage? And this is something that's not a very Republican idea necessarily, but if we as a state create an environment where jobs come in, right? Where we make it a business-friendly atmosphere, where we don't have the unemployment that we do. It's one of the reasons I have sort of issues with the minimum wage hikes as they continue.
Yeah.
One of my dad's business partners many, many years ago talked about and this is when minimum wage was significantly less than it is now, but he would hire a lot more people if he didn't have to pay him that, because if you need a kid or somebody hey, I need somebody to empty the trash, once a day, I'll give you X. We can't do that anymore, right? There's so much liability, all of that. So I think we've lost our way in this regard. I think where the business community is ready and willing to employ people, but they're scared to because of the liability, because of the cost, because of all of those things that we as a state put onto them. So I really think that there is a reset that needs to happen where.
Yeah, no, I think like we just need, I mean, to your point, we've passed a lot of policies, right, that have done the opposite of what they're intended to do, right? We say we're going to increase this price here and not think about the consequence that has on, for example, with the minimum wage. What does that do to the price of food? What does that do to the prices for the people that are, trying to get by, right? Housing. I mean, one of the best ways we can keep people in their houses is by bringing down the cost of housing in California. Right. I mean, it is out of control, and we've passed all of these policies. We'll pass some rent control policy that actually forces property owners to get out of the rental market because they don't want to have that liability and deal with the regulations of renting a property anymore. So we reduce the supply of housing as opposed to allowing, the market to actually build without too many regulations, to actually rent without too many regulations. And we're seeing the consequences of that with some of the highest housing costs in the entire nation.
100%.
Right?
And if you have a duplex or whatever it may be, and all of a sudden you're getting sued, from a tenant group who is just and this is where we could tie in PAGA to all of this, right? Yeah. And I'm dealing with an individual in my district. Incredibly cheap rents for fixed income families, for senior citizens, right? And somebody left, and all of a sudden somebody out of LA, some attorney, and now they're getting sued, right? No, it's insane. So there's absolutely no incentives for people to take that risk anymore. There really isn't. And I don't know if you saw this last week, but I don't know, it was probably 10 days ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. I don't know exactly when the deal was cut. And I'm me, I'm a very labor-friendly Republican. Teamsters cut a deal with UPS. Okay. Last week, UPS laid off 14,000 people.
Saw that. Yep.
Not saying those two are connected. And I will this is where there's, just because you can do something doesn't mean you always should. Yeah. Because there's consequences to that.
No, it's a great point. Speaking of PAGA, let's talk about PAGA. But before we talk about PAGA, because that was one of the other initiatives that is on the horizon, right? It won't be on the ballot coming up, but it, potentially in November. But before we move on from Prop 1, I just wanted to make the final point that in the podcast notes, we're going to link the legislative analysts overview of Prop 1, so people can go and read that. But what I always encourage people to do is don't stop reading at the ballot and title on your ballot, right? That is written by a partisan attorney general who wants you to read it in a certain way. I always encourage people, go, and we're going to link it in the notes, but go to the legislative analyst's analysis of the initiative to get the nonpartisan facts, because I really think it's critical that people read that versus kind of the slanted whatever the initiative is, right?
I think it's a great point, and it's good encouragement. And if you ever want to just prove your point, bring the LAOs, their version, and then set it beside the Attorney General's version, and it'll prove your point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's pretty interesting.
It's very, very different. So definitely, if you want just kind of the nonpartisan overview analysis of that, you can check the notes there. But let's talk about PAGA, because PAGA is the Private Attorneys General's Act, and it is something, in a lot of ways, if anyone remembers the ADA lawsuits from a number of years ago, where small businesses were being sued for very tiny infractions, and then having to correct them and going out of business in some cases because of there wasn't enough time or they were not able to correct these small things. PAGA is kind of a new version of that, but I think on steroids. I think it's even worse. It is really, it is essentially empowered class action lawsuits against businesses. But I think the most over employment violations. But I think the craziest thing about the way it is all structured now is, yes, we believe that if an employee has been wronged, they should be able to get compensation or get, have some sort of recourse, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what PAGA did when we passed PAGA is it empowered lawyers to get all of the compensation and the money, and employees that are actually harmed get a fraction of the actual damages that are found,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so it has just created this, I think, completely backward system that is really putting a lot of strain on business owners. I didn't know if you wanted to opine any further on that, but it's just...
I can opine on this issue for sure. As you well know, I've been vice chair of labor for my entire time I've been elected. And so we've heard PAGA a lot. And there's no other way to put PAGA than legal extortion. And I think you bringing it up to ADA is a really good comparison. I'm pretty confident it was Assemblymember Adam Gray and Kristen Olson that joined together to deal with the ADA issue. And PAGA originally started by the same group of attorneys. Once they realized they couldn't go after ADA, they went after these issues, right?
Yeah.
I have files upon files of examples over the last number of years where attorneys are getting 6-7 figures on a settlement, and the employee is getting 400. I had one from a major corporation where the settlement was 32 cents.
Jeez.
And so I actually recently had this conversation with the new chair of labor committee, that if we truly care, if as a labor committee, we care about workers, which is what we swear we do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then why on God's green earth do the attorneys get all the money and the employees get pennies on the dollar?
Yeah.
If PAGA is truly about protecting the employee,
Right.
and we all know this. I mean, the private attorneys lobby corps up here was pretty powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Not so much with our side of the aisle, but certainly with our colleagues. And I've met with them every year I've been up here, and I have this conversation with them. It's just like, I don't understand this. From your perspective, I get it. But from a labor committee perspective,
it makes no sense.
It makes absolutely no sense at all. And I was somewhat encouraged by that, to be honest with you. I mean, she was just like, I know very little about this. I'd love to learn more. And I was like, well, I would love to help educate you on this issue.
Yeah.
Because like our family, like we're in business.
Yeah.
And it's extortion where you can have anybody file a lawsuit and all they're wanting is that settlement.
Yep.
Where they're going to make $6-7 on a small one. The employee is going to make $100.
Yep.
And the attorneys move on, and they send out thousands of these emails, thousands of these postcards a week.
Yep. And
they're just throwing noodles on the wall.
It is, I hate to say it, it's like in some ways a giant scam.
Total scam.
From and we've created this a few times in California, right?
Mm-hmm.
We mentioned the ADA issue. We also created it with the Voters' Rights Act. These lawyers that go up and down the state suing districts for holding at-large elections and walking away with $30,000 checks every time because the law has empowered them to do that.
100%.
And I think we as a legislature need to be a lot more careful with this. I know that some of it is special interest driven, and maybe it's a matter of political will, to be honest with you, to avoid putting these things into law. But we have to do more to avoid, empowering lawyers in the way that we have.
I think it's both parties. We have our people, our colleagues have theirs, right? At some point, though, we need to look through a fresh set of lenses.
Yeah.
Like where we really, truly, if we're actually having this conversation, I'm sorry. Like first of all, I do not believe that employers are inherently wrong in the state of California. I actually argue that 99.9% of all employers in the state are doing the right thing for their employees. I just simply do. Now, does it say there's not a bad actor? And I think they should be whacked, right? I think we should sort that out through the courts. That is not what PAGA is doing right now.
Yeah.
PAGA was hijacked by a group. It's just like, we could argue, EPA, the start of EPA. President Reagan started that, right? With good intentions. Yeah. And then it gets kind of hijacked, right? Sure. And so I think PAGA is sort of the same way. We need to protect employees, but it's been absolutely extorted.
This way.
No, this is awful.
So this initiative actually qualified for the ballot. There's another initiative on Proposition 47 that I was just going to briefly go over because I know we're running out of time here, that is currently collecting signatures for the November ballot. And I think it's over halfway for sure, maybe 2/3 of the way there, but that would provide drug and mental health treatment for people addicted to hard drugs. Speaking to what we were speaking to earlier, adding fentanyl to existing laws prohibiting possession of hard drugs while armed with a firearm, adding fentanyl to trafficking laws, permitting judges to use their discretion to sentence drug dealers to prison instead of county jail when they're convicted of hard drugs, warning drug dealers that they could be charged with murder. This is something we've talked about if they continue to traffic hard drugs, increasing penalties for people who repeatedly engage in retail theft, add new laws to address the increasing problem of smash and grabs, and reinstate penalties for dealers who seriously injure someone. The other thing in here that I don't think is in this section is trying to bring back the drug court system in a way where you can offer someone jail time or treatment. And I think that is something that we've completely lost track of since Proposition 47 is passed. So I just wanted to bring these two up at the end because I think, what a lot of people, this was a recent change. In 2014, the legislature passed SB 1253, which created this process that allows ballot initiative proponents to withdraw their initiative. I think it's like 131 days prior to the election. If the legislature and them can work out some sort of, agreement, right? I think that both of these things potentially, one of them's qualified on PAGA and the other one's probably will qualify on Prop 47. Do you think that they're going to have an impact on what we do as a legislature this year? And is it the leverage that we need or that our colleagues need to act on some of these huge issues?
Yes and yes. I think it's going to have a huge impact on what we do. And I also think it is the leverage that we need. We both know it's also why they're trying to change some of these rules. Yeah. Let's be very honest. Like, I understand the frustration. Like, propositions don't always get it right. There are things that I wish that we could, change. Yeah. But because it's a prop, we have to go back to the voters, and that's a challenge, right? Yeah. So I'm not saying that propositions are the greatest thing since sliced bread. What I am saying, though, is it's absolutely one of the last checks and balances we have on Sacramento. Yeah. That if something goes awry, we can take it to the voters. And I think that has got some of my Democratic colleagues scared, our Democratic colleagues scared. Yeah. Hoover did the same thing a few years ago on AB 5. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Took it to the voters. Mm-hmm. Well, guess what happened? The voters agreed with them. Yeah. Yeah. Right. And so I think a lot of times Sacramento likes to do things in a silo because they don't really want to talk about it. I think that this is what we need. I think both of these will have a strong impact on what happens in Sacramento, for sure. And that's one thing like PAGA, I'm excited about that for the first time. And now I can get
a real movement. Yeah.
And it's probably not going to be as far as what you and I would prefer.
Right.
But that's also not the world we live in. Yeah. And so a little bit of movement's better than nothing.
No, you heard it here first. I hope you're right.
Yeah, we'll see.
I think it will create some important leverage. So we're over time, but I had to play you this clip real quick for our clip of the week. Speaking of Prop 47, Newsom went on a little bit about this week, and some of you may have already heard it, but I'm going to play it here, and then we'll react.
Says, sir, you dropped this. And he comes back, picks it up, and keeps walking out. as we're checking out, the woman says, "Oh, he's just walking out. He didn't pay for that." I said, "Well, why didn't you stop him?" She goes, "Oh, the governor." Swear to God, true story. And my mom's great. The governor lowered the threshold. There's no accountability. I said, "That's just not true." And I said, "We have the 10th toughest, $950, the 10th toughest in America." She doesn't even know what I was talking about. By the way, it's the 10th toughest in America. Look it up. No one gives a damn about that. And I said, "It's just not true. There's still stop." They said, "Well, we don't stop them because of the governor." And then she looks at me twice, and then she freaks out. She calls everyone over, wants to take photos. I'm like, "No, I'm not taking a photo. We're having a conversation. Where's your manager? How are you blaming the governor?" And it was, $380 later. And I was like, "Why am I spending $380? Everyone can walk the hell right out."
Well, that's not fair. Not fair.
I mean, he's got a point.
Okay, but why am I we've been asking this for years.
Yeah.
Why am I spending money and you're not holding those people accountable
That's crazy.
for walking out? It's like, well, what's your reaction to it? Because I got to get my thoughts together now. Because every time I hear it, it's got 5.3 million views. I think about 1 million of those are me. But go ahead.
No, listen. I think then the governor, in the privacy of his own home, honestly shares the frustration. I think we have no political will to deal with it, though. I really do believe that's and I think he was being somewhat honest right there, quite frankly. Because we've all had, literally earlier in this podcast, we talked about, I've had the same thought process. This dude's running out the front door. I'm the idiot sitting here paying.
Yeah.
Who's the dummy? Right.
Yeah.
And I think the governor had a moment of honesty there. It was I'm sitting here waiting for $380, but at some point, the majority party has to have the political will to hold people accountable for their actions. And right now we don't have that. Yeah.
I think he came off very out of touch.
Totally.
I don't know how often he shops at Target. But it almost seemed like a new concept to him that this was going on. And I think that's what drives me crazy.
I don't know if that's
I don't know. That's just my perception, but
But to your point, how often does, and then I don't know, does the governor shop at Target that much? So
I don't know.
At some times, it takes somebody to see something firsthand to realize, holy crap, we are idiots. This is craziness now. And I'm not listen, the governor tomorrow could make these changes if he wanted to. He could put out a press release telling the elected officials, let's do this.
Yep.
And we would all act on that, right?
Yep.
He has the ability to. So now we just need to have the political will.
It was Governor Brown that pushed for Prop 47. Governor Newsom could push to reform or repeal it. It's that simple. Yeah. And he still, even as legislators are introducing reform bills, he has not come out and taken a position on anything yet. He needs to show leadership on this issue. And real quickly, I just want to debunk this absolute terrible argument that we are the 10th toughest in the nation. That is completely misleading and disingenuous to say that. Yes, when you look at misdemeanor shoplifting and felony shoplifting, in one category, $950. I think it's the felony category. $950 is, I believe, the 10th, 10th highest in the nation. But that's for felonies. The difference is that we don't punish anyone for misdemeanors. If you go and committed a misdemeanor theft in Texas, you're going to jail. So it's so disingenuous for the governor to say, we're the 10th toughest in the nation. No, we're not, because we don't punish people when they commit misdemeanors like every other state does. And it is so incredibly dishonest, I think, to claim that.
Well, and I think the interesting little fact on what he was saying there too is all those other states, I'm pretty confident if you steal $250 today, $250 tomorrow, that's $500, right?
Yeah.
Right now, you can steal $900 and whatever, $60 a day, but it doesn't matter. You could literally do it every single day in Texas.
Slap on the wrist.
And the term is, I'm just losing the term that I'm looking for, but we don't have these aggregated sentencing.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think that's the interesting little like fact that people don't realize. Like, yeah, you can cite all these states, but they're aggregated. We're not.
Yeah. No, it's I think I think it really did, to me at least, show that he's out of touch, somewhat obviously being dishonest on the issue because he wants to deflect blame. But I think you're right. The reality is that he could help change this if he really made it a priority.
And that's where I go back to. And I know we're out of time, but like,
yeah,
you are the governor of the 5th largest economy in the world.
Yep.
Like, your words actually mean something. So this is an issue that all of us are dealing with. He and he alone has the ability to make like major changes. Now, I would just encourage him to have the political will to do so.
Yep. Let's end there. As we ride out here, as we wrap up, any Super Bowl predictions? What are we thinking?
I mean, let's be honest. Niners.
Niners, right? You got to go Niners.
I'm so excited. It's going to be such a great game. And
I'm nervous, but I am excited.
I'm certainly nervous. Like, yeah, it's all good. Niners, come on now.
Yeah, we'll go Niners. Hopefully next week we're right. You know, but rematch should be fun. Yeah. Would love to see. My son told me yesterday, I just want to see Taylor Swift lose the Super Bowl. It's like, all right, I don't know why everyone's so
yeah,
you know.
No, it's a real thing.
It'd be fun.
We should do a whole podcast on what Taylor Swift has done to the NFL.
Maybe we'll keep that in our back pocket for a future episode. I don't know. We're going to wrap there. Thanks, Heath, for coming on. If you want to share ideas for future shows, you can email us at pointoforderpod@gmail.com. You can watch, follow, subscribe on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Threads at Point of Order Pod. And you can follow today's hosts on X or Twitter at Joshua_Hoover for me, or at Heath Flora CA for Heath Flora. Thanks again, Heath. Appreciate it.
Love it. Always fun, my friend. Thank you.
Have a good one.